Hello, everyone. My name is Davita Lancelin, and I'm joining you today to discuss collecting evidence in a virtual learning environment. As the implementation of virtual instruction becomes a part of the new normal in our schools, many educators who are tasked to observe and support instruction are wondering, what should I look for when I observe virtual instruction? And what evidence should I gather to ensure that I can give the best feedback possible to the teachers I support and evaluate? In this session, we will discuss how to collect evidence from multiple virtual lesson components and why doing this is needed to provide quality feedback to teachers. So throughout our time together, I want you to think about the following guiding question. How do I ensure that the evidence I collect from a teacher's virtual instruction is comprehensive, high quality, and enables me to effectively plan for high quality feedback? Now let's start from the beginning. If we know that the goal of in-person and virtual instruction is to provide students with opportunities to progress towards mastery of grade level standards, and that during the instructional time, teachers are encouraged and understand that quality teaching includes maximizing opportunities for student learning, and then we combine that with the goal of a comprehensive teacher evaluation and support system, which is rooted in growing teachers to grow students, then it becomes important that as we observe instruction, we keep our focus on the impact that the instruction has on student learning and their progress towards mastery of the standards. So, why must we engage in an observation process that includes the collection of evidence? Let's explore the why and reflect on this quote. If research states that evidence is what grounds agreement on the quality of a practice, as well as the conversation about how to improve, and then when an observer calls attention to specific actions that took place in the lesson, it begins to demystify those ratings and provides a clear starting point for discussing how teachers can actually implement that change. Because what we know already is that part of growing teachers instructionally resides in our ability to provide high quality feedback to teachers around their instruction. In order to assist teachers with making the shifts, the feedback must be rooted in authentic actions that teachers and students engage in within the lesson with a focus on its impact. That high quality feedback needs to be rooted in the evidence. So, as we move on to thinking about the collection of evidence, I want you to take some time to reflect and connect and think about what opportunities might an observer have to collect evidence during virtual instruction. And as you reflect on this piece, I want you to think about in a virtual lesson, levels of student engagement may require the teacher to include shorter segments of time for the live synchronous lesson, thus forming that need for students to receive opportunities to engage in the content outside of that synchronous space, more in the asynchronous platform. This becomes important because students, whether in person or virtual, they need opportunities to engage with the content, engage with their teacher, and engage with their peers, which requires the teacher to think and plan differently to ensure that student engagement in the learning space, in the virtual learning space, continues to occur. So as observers begin collecting evidence in both that synchronous and asynchronous space, it's going to be helpful for us to make those connections to the lesson cycle. So when we think about the lesson cycle, we really need to think about the planning of the lesson, the delivery of the lesson, and the measuring of that lesson, that impact on student learning. So as we think about our experiences with virtual instruction, we might see that learning continues from the synchronous to the asynchronous space and possibly back and forth. When we observe instruction, we need to make sure that we have that clear, comprehensive pathway to student learning. So let's go just a little bit deeper. In the planning phase of the lesson, we might get some insight into how the teacher plans to engage students in the learning on that virtual platform. As an observer, you must think about the fullness of the lesson, thinking about the beginning, the middle, to the end, and understand that the entire lesson may move in and out of that synchronous and asynchronous platform, which is why, as an observer, you may want to ensure that you do an analysis of the lesson plan to look at the sequence of the lesson in addition to a review of the class website or maybe that learning platform that's used for asynchronous instruction. Possible evidence that you might want to secure could be evidence of the explicit explanations and or annotations in the teacher's lesson plan that really identify how the teacher is going to communicate the learning target and that connected success criteria to students. Maybe even looking at those assessment checkpoints and the mode of execution of those checkpoints on that virtual platform, along with those virtual instructional strategies that will be differentiated for the diversity of student needs. You might even notice how the teacher may highlight some of those higher order questions or those tasks that are going to really facilitate that thinking and problem solving for students. And then even the opportunities where students are going to be able to engage and interact with not only the teacher, but with one another. An additional asynchronous consideration could be when you look at how the platform is organized, the asynchronous platform's organization, make sure that it's accessible for all students and it includes explicit expectations. The key here is going to be to begin to gather your understanding about the structure of the lesson and the teacher's intent or their plan for student learning, remembering that the evidence collected in teacher plans becomes permanent once you see the evidence in action during delivery. For example, the observer can access the teacher's asynchronous lesson to see how the teacher organizes their learning space to make the learning accessible to students. The observer might take note of the teacher's landing page for the week's lesson, noting that the page is color-coded and includes an overview of the learning that will occur for each day for students along with their assignment expectations. The observer may also note that in that platform, the teacher has planned for students to have access to the goals and objectives for each day. And even noticing that evidence from this slide could possibly even be used to support how the teacher plans for the alignment to the learning targets. And then once the observer digs just a little bit deeper into that platform, they may even notice how the colors used by the teacher also helps to provide a visual display to keep students on track for each day's lesson. And it also provides insight on the teacher's pacing. By looking at the teacher's lesson plan, in addition to the organization of the teacher's asynchronous platform, the observer gets initial insight into the teacher's planning for student learning. Then as you get into the delivery component of the virtual learning space, you might want to make sure that you're listening and watching for teacher and student actions, that you're looking for student engagement in the asynchronous exercises, and that throughout the lesson, you're assessing student expectations. And as you engage in the observation, you should be able to see the teacher's plan in action and gather some of the following evidence: that explicit communication of the learning target and success criteria for students, that student dialogue and discussion that expresses understanding of the lesson's expectations, whether you've seen it through the chat or the discussion boards. Teachers modeling of expectations for learning and the use of those virtual strategies, looking for maybe those visuals, those models and labels that'll assist students with the content and those techniques, as well as maybe some academic feedback that's provided by the teacher and students, and those opportunities for student interaction through the use of maybe some type of virtual grouping strategy. And then asynchronously, you may even notice students' use of shared folders, which might include some instructional supports for students. You may even notice recordings and or visuals that help to reestablish that learning goal, as well as maybe some student work and responses to tasks on that asynchronous platform. The ultimate goal here is to see that the evidence collected during the delivery of instruction is geared towards how students are engaging with and have access to the learning in the virtual space, in addition to the impact the instruction has on student progress towards mastery. For example, in the delivery of a synchronous lesson, you may even note how the teacher provides opportunities in the lesson where students are able to collaborate with one another in breakout rooms. As the teacher sets up the assignment, the students were provided with expectations for group learning, and the assignment was organized where students were expected to write answers to prompts in their chosen color-coded box, thus providing students with accountability, which allowed the teacher the opportunity to assess the level of student learning, participation, and engagement in the breakout group. And then, you may even note as students worked, they were provided varied opportunities to assist them as they worked through that group assignment in that breakout room. Success criteria outlining the expectations for mastery of the task. They also had the CER organization anchor chart that helped to assist them with crafting their responses. And then there was also a video there that would help to further show the expectations for the actual group task. And then as an observer during the breakout room, you may even notice students using that success criteria and that anchor chart to provide each other with academic feedback. Or maybe you notice how the teacher circulates through the breakout rooms to monitor student progress and provide feedback, maybe even through the shared documents, or even just by going in and out of the breakout rooms. Then as the lesson culminates, the observer can continue to analyze the impact of instruction on student learning through the analysis of student work and the quality and level of student and teacher feedback. This evidence could come from the observer using the student work to assess student mastery of the learning target against the communicated success criteria, maybe even taking note of student reflections and self-assessment opportunities, as well as using evidence of student thinking and learning from responses both written and orally. An additional asynchronous consideration might be evidence of student work that's exhibiting academic feedback from both the teachers and the students, and also giving those opportunities for revision. An example could be for their exit ticket, students individually responded to prompt and they identified success criteria and anchor chart to help actually self-assess their writing prior to submitting their assignment. And then the teacher also provides that feedback and refers students back to the success criteria with an additional support to give students multiple opportunities for success. Then you may even notice that the teacher allows the students to resubmit their work once they receive the feedback from the teacher, giving them that additional opportunity to strengthen their work. The observer should then take time to review that student work sample and assess student progress towards mastery of the learning target. So I want us to come back and revisit our guiding question, really thinking about how do I ensure that the evidence that I'm collecting from that teacher's virtual instruction is going to be comprehensive, high quality, and it enables you to effectively plan for high quality feedback. We must remember it is important that as observers of virtual instruction, that the evidence that we find in the planning, delivering, and measuring components of the lesson, that they actually help to provide a comprehensive view of student learning. It's also going to be important for us to remember that the evidence should provide the teacher with authentic examples from the lesson that truly illustrate the impact the instruction had on student learning. It's going to keep the observation objective and rooted in the learning, and it's going to help with teacher reflection. And why would we want to do that? Because the difference between learning a skill and being able to implement it effectively resides in our capacity to engage in deep, continuous, rigorous thought about that skill. And we want teachers to be able to reflect on their instruction so that they can make those changes. So now it's time for action. We want you to think about what action steps will you take to ensure that there's transfer in this practice. Thank you for joining us today. For more information about NIET and our approach to building educator excellence to give all students the opportunity for success, visit us at www.niet.org or connect with us on our social media sites, Facebook and Twitter at NIET Teach.